Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to apply risk management throughout the product life cycle of your medical device. My name is Jessica Lyons. I'm a senior medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be moderating today's event. We've got a really great presentation scheduled for you guys today. I know Mike is really looking forward to sharing his insights and expertise on the application of risk management throughout the product life cycle of a medical device. Mike Baca and I were talking before we jumped on about his excitement on this particular presentation and looking forward to sharing it with you guys. Before we dive too deeply into today's presentation and introduce our presenter and his consultancy, White Rook Consulting, I want to touch on a couple of housekeeping items really quickly. First, today's webinar is going to run for about 60 minutes. It will include a question and answer session at the end where Mike is going to go through and answer your questions. So make sure that you guys submit your questions throughout the webinar. There's a box on the right-hand side, and as they come up, go ahead and enter them in there. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of today's presentation, and the rest we'll definitely make sure that we follow up with you on those. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on these free training sessions. If you've been on one of these training sessions before, then you know we put these on because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru, likely a similar mission as many of you on today's webinar. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We are constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether it's through hosting these free training sessions, through partnering with world-class medical device consultants, like today's presenter, Mike Baca, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based, general-purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software, I encourage you to head over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation and schedule your free personalized one-on-one demo. In doing so, you will learn how the very best medical device companies are leveraging our purpose-built quality management software to gain ISO 13485-2016 certification, market approval, breeze through audits, and push beyond just compliance to produce true quality medical devices. So if you're interested in learning on how we can help your device company, make sure you visit greenlight.guru after today's webinar. Now on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to your presenter today, a distinguished partner of ours here at Greenlight Guru, Mike Baca. Mike graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he served as an officer in the Field Artillery Branch of the U.S. Army. After the military, Mike joined Johnson & Johnson, working there for 22 years, processing through numerous assignments of increasing responsibility in the quality and regulatory disciplines through 4 operating companies, and Johnson & Johnson Corporate as a quality and compliance services account director, responsible for corporate oversight of several medical device implant divisions. Mike then joined Medtronic, serving as head of quality in the neuromodulation and later cardiac rhythm disease management divisions, before joining Stryker Instruments as the global vice president of the Instruments division, responsible for quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and clinical sciences. He retired in November of 2017, forming his consultancy, White Rook Consulting, not long after consulting in his areas of expertise. He resides in Kalamazoo, Michigan with his wife, Adrienne, and together they've got a son, John. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Mike and risk management.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate the introduction. Today, really what I'd like to do is to talk about a way that I've utilized risk management throughout the product life cycle. Essentially, we're taking about a 16-hour course and condensing it to 60 minutes. So there are some things that we're going to kind of skip over, but if there are specific questions, please ask those in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. When we talk about product lifecycle management, the basic areas that I want to cover is from concept through development, through launch, post-market, and then product obsolescence. To do that, When we talk about risk management, the major elements are risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk control, overall risk evaluation, and production and post-production monitoring. Now, there are more elements than that, obviously, such as the risk management plan, risk benefit analysis, the risk management report, etc. We can touch on those a little bit later. As a basic primer for risk management, this graphic kind of shows what we're talking about. So when you're talking about a user or operator of a medical device, is going to take the functional inputs and what they do with that device, as well as the potential for use errors that they may commit. And one of the things that is important, that as we go through risk management, it's important to consider the foreseeable misuse of that device. In a perfect world, everybody will use everything perfectly. In the real world, that doesn't always occur. Also, you can have environmental that can have an impact upon that medical device. The net result of that is product failure modes. When those product failure modes occur, there may be an output that constitutes a hazard to the device. Once that is exposed to a person affected, which may be a patient or a healthcare provider or another individual in proximity to that device, but it could affect that person. A certain percentage of the time, they may be exposed to that hazardous situation and nothing will occur, and therefore there is no harm. However, in other circumstances, they can be exposed to that hazardous situation and harm will occur. This really forms the basis of all the risk management that will follow. Part of that, I guess, can be exhibited here by this photograph. So if you look into what we do as far as risk management is concerned, we have a functional output of a grizzly bear that's appeared on the putting green. And that hazard is the bear. The hazardous situation now is that we have golfers that are in proximity to that bear. Whether or not that will result in harm kind of depends on whether or not the golfers are able to get out of the way of the bear. If you look at our golfer on the left, you'll notice that he's already pretty much done his plan, do, check, act cycle. And he's already decided to act. And you notice the other two golfers appear to be stuck in their plan cycle there. And I think the golfer on the left understands the only thing he has to do is outrun the other two golfers. That's kind of a depiction of what that might look like. The other basic element is going to be the risk matrix. And the risk matrix really is foundational because when all of the risk management gets said and done, it will plot itself out on this risk matrix. There's different types of risk matrices that people can use. There's 5x5s, 6x5s, 4x4s, etc. That's kind of a decision that you will have to make for yourself. This particular one is one that I'm used to using, which is essentially a 6x5, which has severity on the bottom, which goes from essentially 0 all the way up to an S5, which is death. And the descriptions of those are included in the slide. Also looking at the probability of the occurrence of harm. And notice it goes from an 01 to an 05. One of the things that you can consider is, do you want to make that quantitative or qualitative? And I've seen it done both ways. What's helpful is if you can make that quantitative, that will be helpful down the road when you get into post-market surveillance and monitoring of the product, because you will then have the ability to apply some statistical analysis to what is the occurrence of the issues that may be occurring. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. So let's talk about the first part of it, which is concept. And we talk about concept, what I've kind of done here is map it against the life cycle of the product against where are we in risk analysis and where are we in the risk management process. And typically in the concept stage is also where we're going to be talking about risk analysis. As an aside, I've also put in there where this fits within some of our design reviews so that we know exactly where those things are going to be covered. So there's a lot of words on the slide, so what I've tried to do is to break that down a little bit. And so really starts off with review and confirm your intended use. What are you going to use the device for? This is very foundational because this is going to drive the rest of your risk management. obviously do not want to be looking at risk for something you don't intend to do. And when you get to the regulatory portion of it, and whether you're filing a PMA or a 510K, then this is also going to be very important because it's going to be foundational to the submission of your information to the regulatory authorities. From there, we're going to go again and look at this risk acceptability matrix. And it's going to be very important at the outset that there is alignment between quality, regulatory, design, the commercial side of the business, that from a risk management perspective, this essentially, at least for me, became my Bible of how am I going to handle risk management as I move this product through the product development cycle and through its product life cycle. And hopefully I will expand on that a little bit later. Then you'll start working on establishing a functional analysis to include the scope of everything that you're going to look at. There are many ways to get this done. Most people will use this in some sort of FMEA that will be tied to fault tree analysis that may be done later, typically done in a matrix that is going to outline all the elements that you're going to be looking at. Later on, if we have time, I can show you an example of that. Then work to look at what are the identified hazards associated with each functional output, and try to understand what could go wrong. And if it goes wrong, what's the hazard that's going to be associated with it? You start documenting all of that. When you do that, I have seen these to be hundreds of lines long. When you start looking at the major elements and subsystems, if you have a large medical device, it can also be fairly small if you have a very simple single-use device. But again, for a capital piece of equipment, I've seen these a couple of hundred items long. With that, now start to identify what are the hazardous situations that could be occurring with each of those hazards that has been identified. And where are people going to be exposed? Is it going to be the patient? Is it going to be the healthcare provider? Is it going to be the nurse? Is it going to be actually somebody that could be involved with cleaning up the operating room after the patient's already left for some residual hazard? But really take a close look at what are all the hazardous situations that could occur as a result of each hazard with a malfunction or something going wrong with the device. Once you have the hazardous situations identified, now what are the harms if someone were to get involved in that hazardous situation, be exposed to it, and then that hazardous situation were to manifest itself into harm? Then start thinking about what is the extent of what that harm could be. And it's not unusual to have a single hazardous outcome result in a harm that goes anywhere from an S0 to an S5, because depending on how that hazardous situation manifests itself into harm, that could go, again, that entire gamut. And sometimes I've seen that noted in the risk management file where you have one hazardous situation that can manifest itself into several levels of harm depending on how it manifests itself. From there, identify and analyze each of the causes that can trigger each of those hazardous situations. There are many items that you can use to do that. 5 Whys, 8 Ds, Kepner-Trago analysis, different types of analyses that you can go at to try to identify what are those root causes, what are those causes, and what can I do to either eliminate them through design or other methodologies. We'll talk about the other methodologies later, but it is always advisable to see if you can remove that root cause as opposed to having to deal with it later in the use of the design. From there, now start to identify what are the risk control measures that I can use for those causes. Can I redesign? Can I do something that precludes the risk or that cause or that failure from manifesting itself? What are the things that I can do to mitigate that risk? Then with that, now start to estimate what are the risks associated with each of those hazardous situations. You've got to assume that the planned or existing risk control measures will be implemented. Now we're getting down to the part where rubber really is starting to meet the road, because now we've looked at all this, we've analyzed it, and now we're analyzing what is the actual risk profile now looking like for our device. And again, this is a good time to go back and ask the question, is there anything more that I can do about this? Is there anything that I can do that keeps this risk from manifesting itself? Then you look at each individual risk and look at it, is risk reduction necessary, or is it possible? Now, before we get too far into this, recognizing there's actually two standards in effect right now. We have the standard in Europe, which is the EN-ISO 14971-2012, and in part of that standard, they talk about the AFAP region, which is as far as possible. For the US, we have the ISO 14971-2007, which is still using the ALARP region, which is as low as practical. There's a lot of discussion going back and forth on that. If we have time, we can get to that. But for the purposes of this, I want to talk about what is actually practical. So for each individual risk, is risk reduction necessary or possible? But for this particular item, is there something more that we can do? Is there something more that we can do? Now getting into development, another little eye chart here, we're going to break it down a little bit more. In this one, I do want to kind of take us through the flow chart of when we're in development and we're talking about our risk control. Then we want to go through the process, and as we go through the process, we want to understand, is there a way to reduce the risk by safe design? If we can do that, by all means do that. If we can't do that, if we feel that we've got the most elegant design that we can come up with, and at this point in time, we cannot reduce it by safe design, then you have to ask the question, can we reduce it by protective measures in the device or in the manufacturing process? Can I add something over a switch to make sure that you have to do an overt act of commission before I actually flip that switch? Or is there another guard that I can put on there? If the answer to that, then document that as an additional risk control measure. If the answer to that is no still, can I reduce the risk by information for safety? And I hate to say it, but some people have said that, labeling sometimes is the last refuge of a scoundrel. So, you can't just assume that if I put a label on there, a warning label, that everybody is going to abide by that. But if we feel that there is the opportunity to do that, and I can put additional information for safety, then I can do that. And you document that as an additional risk control measure. If the answer to that is still no, then can I reduce the risk by restricting the intended use? And then again, if you decide to reduce the intended use, you may have just now cut your market in half because you're not going to be able to go after that market. If the answer to that is yes, and you want to do that, then by all means restrict the use. If the answer to that is no, and I've gone through all this, now you have to ask yourself very seriously, do the medical benefits of this outweigh the individual residual risk? For this, and I've been very blessed in the companies I've been on or been in, that we have medical directors, MDs on staff, where we can sit down and have that very, very important discussion. If the answer to that is yes, then I may continue to move forward because that residual risk may be judged to be acceptable. If the answer to that is no, that I have now up front identified a risk that is unacceptable, then I'm going to abort the project if none of these other things will work. If, however, I am able to get back into the part of the table where I've documented the additional risk in those control measures, I've estimated the residual risk, assuming that all planned or existing and additional risk control measures will be implemented, then I ask myself again the question, is further individual risk necessary or possible? If the answer to that is yes, I go through that cycle again. And it's not unusual to go through this cycle several times as you're in development. as you continue to ask those hard questions. At the end of the day, anything that can be done that can reduce that risk that you've identified through the design of the device is something that will pay you dividends 10 times over after you've released the device, believe me, okay? Once you've worked out your way through that and you get to the point where the residual risk is judged acceptable, pending some verification, but you've now considered it acceptable, then you continue to move forward. As you look at that and you're putting in new additional risk control measures, I kind of call this the Murphy rule. Murphy's Law is out there. Murphy's Law is saying that once I change something, that something else could go wrong. So is there a new hazard or hazardous situation introduced, or are existing risks affected due to the additional things that I've done? This is also known as the law of unintended consequence, where I think I've done something good, but it resulted in something bad actually happening. If the answer to that is yes, you go back into design. If the answer to that is no, then I identify and communicate the criticality information pertaining to the risk control measures that I'll be doing through my risk management file. And I'm going to document this so that now I'm going to verify and implement all of the risk control measures that I've identified, and this will all be documented in the risk management file. I will then start working through verification on the effectiveness of all these risk control measures, and all this will be also tied into your product development plan. As you now start getting into development, you start getting into design verification and design validation. Once you've completed all this, then you're going to ask, is risk control complete? Are all my hazards accurately identified? Have they all been considered? Again, I document this through my risk management file. We're going to talk about how we align the top-down and the bottom-up risks before too long. But once I have done this, I've now looked and said that the individual residual risks are deemed to be acceptable. If I do that, now I continue on through my process. Basically, as I come out of this process, you can kind of summarize it in this table. So if I look at my risk regions and I look at my high risk or my red regions, as I'm looking at my risk reduction decisions, then risk reduction is going to be necessary. Risk control option analysis required, risk versus benefit. But if I am in a high risk red region, I am going to have to do whatever I can to get it down to the lower level of that region. If the person affected is a patient, then that residual risk is going to be deemed unacceptable unless that risk has been reduced as much as possible or practical, given our previous discussion. But has that risk been reduced as much as possible or practical? And a risk-benefit analysis indicates the medical benefits of the device outweigh the residual risk, in which case that residual risk can be judged as acceptable. And again, those risk versus benefit analyses are on file. They're formal documents, because I can almost guarantee you in the form of an FDA inspection or investigation that you're probably going to be in a position of producing some of that documentation, especially if the FDA is in and they're looking at a for-cause investigation. If the person affected is a user or other person who is not the patient, then that residual risk is going to be unacceptable for example, a healthcare provider. Because when you're looking at a patient, we may deem that to get the benefit of that device, that patient may have to undergo an S5 risk. From my perspective, there should never be an occasion where a healthcare provider is undergoing an S5 risk of death using the device. If you have that, then you may have to consider whether or not you have a tenable device. When you are in the medium or yellow risk region, then going back again through the risk reduction decision, the same as it is for a red risk, the same as it is for a patient if they're affected. And when you look at it or a healthcare provider or another person, then that residual risk is deemed unacceptable unless that risk has been reduced as much as possible or practical, and a risk versus benefit indicates that that medical benefit is going to outweigh that risk. When you're in the low or green section, then when you're looking at risk reduction, then you don't have to do it. It's not necessary unless there is something possible or practical that you can apply to that. In that particular situation, you basically want to say, if I can do it, why not do it if it's going to reduce that risk? Many times when you are in that green region, you're talking about things that are going to be a minor inconvenience or other things that may adversely impact your brand. It may not be impacting the safety of the patient, but again, this is where you have one of those issues that may come into play. When we're in the low risk region and the person affected is a patient or other than the patient, then that risk is deemed to be broadly acceptable. So now we're getting to product launch. As we get to product launch, then we're going to look again, is the overall residual risk acceptable? And this is where we go back to that risk management table, hopefully being highlighted here. And when you're using a 6x5 table, which is the one I'm most used to using, the management decision that we have made, and I've actually been able to use over the past, I guess, 15 years or so, is that if we are in a region where it is in an S3, severity 3, O2, occurrence level 2 or higher, S3, O2 or higher, by definition, it will go to the risk management board. The composition of the risk management board, I'll do a little bit of a side here on at least what I've been using as a risk management board. The risk management board for the past, I guess, 15 years or so, I've been very blessed to serve with company presidents who have made the decision that they would delegate to the quality organization the composition of the authority of the risk management board. The risk management board is typically chaired by the vice president of quality regulatory or vice president of quality, depending on your organization. Composition of the board is typically made of the voting members, which will be the levels of management, vice president for operations, product development, regulatory, if that's a separate organization, post-market surveillance, and then there will be other ad hoc members of the board, which are typically going to be the lawyers, legal, and the medical device, or the medical director. The medical director usually is an MD. Those people will have direct input to the board, typically are not what we call, quote, voting members of the board. They are there to provide advice and counsel. Ancillary members of the board are whoever the board decides they want in a risk management board meeting to get information and context. Routinely, I would require presence of sales and marketing in the risk management board presentations. However, during risk management board deliberations to decide what would be done out of the risk management board, those individuals would not be in the room and would not have a vote. So when the risk management board would convene, then the risk management board would look to see whether or not do the medical benefits outweigh the overall residual risk as defined by the risk matrix. When you get into the areas that are in yellow, that can be a very lively and spirited discussion. To my knowledge, I don't remember ever authorizing release of a product of an S5 that was in the S5 region at an occurrence level of 2. At an occurrence level of 2, that would typically mean that we had experienced some level of S5 with that product. Usually that's very rare, and usually a lot of the S5s that would be identified are actually identified as hypotheticals out of that risk management. However, there may be occasion where the risk management board is examining something where you do have, for example, an S403 or an S502. that will be a very in-depth and very serious and lengthy discussion. If the risk management board makes the decision that the overall residual risk does outweigh, that the benefit outweighs the risk, then you will continue to go toward launch. If the risk management board feels that further risk reduction is possible or practical or necessary, then the risk management board can send that project back into development and preclude the launch of the product. Again, that can be a very serious and sometimes unpopular decision. However, if the risk management board, and specifically the chair of the risk management board, has been delegated that decisional authority, then again, that can be a very serious discussion and something where serious discussions following that may have to take place. However, if we get through the risk management board, we do decide that the overall residual risk is acceptable, then the risk management report will be completed, and then the project will continue to move to launch. After the product has been launched, then we will get it into a period of post-market surveillance. During the period of post-market surveillance, then you will be reviewing the production and post-production information. Earlier in the discussion, we talked about the importance of knowing what is the occurrence level of issues that are occurring as a result of the use of the product that goes out into the market, or issues that you may be seeing in manufacturing that can make its way to that hazard matrix as a result of failures that may be occurring with the product. When that occurs, if something occurs that causes the thresholds to be breached on that risk matrix, by definition, if a threshold is breached on that risk matrix at an S302 or higher, then that is going to require that whatever that issue is now goes back to the risk management board. In that discussion and deliberation with the risk management board, it goes through that cycle that I just talked about over here, where the risk management board will need to look at what has occurred. Do the medical benefits continue to outweigh that risk? Out of the risk management board post-market, you may see the same things as you may see during pre-market. The risk management board may decide, okay, the product has to be redesigned, or there's an issue with design, it goes back into design. The risk management board may decide to withdraw the market or withdraw the product from the market. The risk management board may decide to do a notification to the market. The risk management board may decide to recall the product. All those things will be under the purview of the risk management board and under their purview to decide what will occur to the product. So if the reassessment of risk is necessary, then you need to go through that. In the event that risk necessary or that risk reduction is not necessary, then you're going to go back into a monitoring phase, and you're going to look at and continue to monitor your production and post-production. In the event you have breached the threshold, you should conduct a risk management board to look at that breach of threshold, because again, number one, it's the right thing to do. But in the event you have to justify that, you will have a documentation that shows that yes, you were aware of it, yes, you analyzed it, and yes, you made a conscious decision that the risk versus benefit was still valid. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened in my career where we've gone to risk management board and found out that something did breach threshold for a severity, not into a red zone and not into S5, but where we've seen with our continued use of the product that we did breach a threshold because we learned something new after the product was launched. After 36 years in the business, I can almost guarantee that you will learn something after you have launched a product. You may have the world's best design and development process, a world-class design, verification, and validation system, the best manufacturing transfer in the world. But I can just about guarantee you get 100,000 or 1,000,000 devices out in the field, you're going to learn something new. So just food for thought there. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about top-down and bottom-up risk management. And I've had the luxury of being inspected by some of the FDA national experts on risk management. And I would ask you to take to heart, because these are some of my lessons learned from having spent a couple of weeks with those individuals. So one is the concept that your top-down risk management must match your bottoms-up failure analysis. So what I mean by that is when you're doing your top-down risk management, you're going to be looking at what are all the potential harms that could occur as a result of the use of my device. And to do that, you're going to do a lot of exploration, a lot of research based on what products have you already launched, what products have your customers or what your competitors launched, what type of things have you seen out in the field, are you monitoring clinical studies? And what you're going to do with that is eventually you will analyze what are all the harms that could occur to my device. Once you've done that, you're also going to, well, this is an actual chart of what we did in one of the businesses I was in. Obviously, the company information has been pulled out. But what we used to do is monitor the severity of harm on harms per million for a selected product, and what was that looking like over a period of time. And were those harms that were being experienced in a harms per million in alignment with what our risk management file said it should be? And then we would look at what are those harms and what is the root cause analysis into those harms. And then we would also look at it by product. And is that trend doing what we expect it to do? Are the improvement things that we're doing having an effect? And am I breaching any of my thresholds? This is one of the what I deem to be a pretty good surveillance tool that kept me aligned to make sure that something wasn't happening that I wasn't expecting. Let's talk about surveillance bottoms up. So bottoms up are really talking about what are the individual things that may be happening out in the field or on the production lines that may lead to these harms. And this is, again, another actual chart from something that we used to do with the company information taken out. But if you look at the bottom, what we were looking at are what are the complaints that we're receiving from the field. And then by looking at that, I could tell through a Pareto analysis, what am I seeing on product A in failure mode number 1? And the legend would tell me on this particular issue, I see that there's an active project already underway because I previously identified this, and the current rate is still going up, which is not what I want. But my surveillance is telling me something is going on. This is something that I will be monitoring very closely. The next one over shows me that this is also the second leading thing that's happening on this line or to this product, but this is something that I've previously identified. I already have a project in place and corrective actions have been implemented. This also tells me that that rate is going down. So for me, that's actually good news. It's bad news that it's second on my Pareto, but it's good news to show that my monitoring is showing that I'm beginning to have an effect. My third one with the blue line is telling me, well, I've got something that's going on. I'm monitoring it, but that rate is going down. And then you can see what it does for the rest of those products. So these are some tools where I'm monitoring actively what's happening bottom up, and I'm also monitoring what's happening top down. And with all of that, that fits into my risk management file. Let's talk a little bit about obsolescence and where we get there. This is a chart that kind of explains about the product life cycle. Yours may vary. This is just an example that I've used. So if we look at the bottom line, at the bottom, what you see is this is the dollar per period and the time period as it goes to the right. And if you look at the bottom, you see that when I'm introducing a product and developing a product, I'm spending money but not making very much money. After I introduce a product and it starts to grow, as it goes through its growth and maturity process, now I'm selling a bunch of that, but I'm also making profit. And if I look at my revenue line, I can see that in introduction, there's not a lot of revenue, but as that product grows and matures, then I will be selling a lot of product and making a lot of profit. When I look at my costs, I can see in introduction, my costs are relatively high because I got to factor in R&D and everything that I have to do there. Through my growth period, my costs start to go down because of scale. And as the process and as my product matures, over time that goes down because again, I get more economy of scale. But as my product gets into decline, then my costs will start to go up a little bit. My profit will probably start to go down, and my overall sales of that product will now start to decline. Usually, but not always, when my profit and cost line cross at some point in time, that's probably the time I'm going to start looking at, do I want to come up with something new? And typically, a medical device manufacturer will look at this, and there will be a new platform or addition to a platform that will be in the works. Okay, so that's the way that we kind of look at that. So before I get into questions, as I was preparing this, someone asked me, why am I doing this? And, why would I want to have this discussion? And the reason really that I have a lot of passion around this particular topic really has to do talking to the audience out there. And I'm assuming there are a lot of quality and professional people that are out there. And one of the reasons risk management is so critically important to me is that when you look at our roles and we decide this risk management and that we're going to release products to market, in essence, what we have done is that we have become the internal customer advocate for the customers and the healthcare providers that will be using our products. What we have done is define an acceptable level of risk that we will be exposing them to without their input. As we continue to monitor this risk, it is so incumbent on us to keep an eye on that, because if that changes and we do not respond to it appropriately, then what we have done is, again, without their knowledge, accepted a new normal that our patients and healthcare providers will be experiencing after we have deemed what that should be acceptable. And if that continues and we don't respond to it appropriately, then very, very bad things can happen. You don't have to go very far, but to look at what's happening in the news and several different things with airplanes and with cars and medical devices, where you've seen some opportunities that have availed themselves where it looks like some people may not have been monitoring things as closely as they should. The other paid political announcement that I will make, again, to the quality and regulatory professionals out there, that as you develop that relationship on your senior management teams, and most importantly, that relationship that you will develop with your company president, as you build that trust-based relationship, I hope you get to the point to where that individual will turn to you and say, I will delegate and trust you with those decisions. I've been very blessed over the last, 12, 15 years or so, working for people like a John Tremmel and a Tom Teft and a Jim Heath and a Spencer Stiles that were tremendous leaders and honorable men that basically said to me during some very tough times on having some very tough decisions, to a man, every one of them had always said to me as we're working through this, as we're trying to make these hard decisions, all of them always said to me, Mike, do the right thing. So with that, I'll end my portion of this. We got a couple of minutes, and I'll open it up. And Jessica, do we have any questions?
Oh, we do. So, Mike, first and foremost, thank you so much for going through this today. It's been a great presentation. Those charts in particular have been an audience favorite. Lots of people have been very excited about those. So, before we jump into the actual questions from the presentation, speaking of those charts, somebody did ask where those flow charts that you had on risk management actually come from? Are they ones that you created yourself? Are they ones that come from a standard? And I'm assuming a follow up question to that is, can we get access to them? Because these were extremely helpful to break the process down.
Okay, so I just pulled one of the charts up, and really what that was one of my company's interpretation as we worked our way through uh, 14971. And what it did was to try to provide us a roadmap of how do we do that. So, the other thing I can't speak to in great detail because it is kind of proprietary, but if you'll notice how the risk management is tied to the development process, and it's also tied to design reviews and specific references. Those 9.4.1, 9.4.4, those were tied back into the specific paragraphs that were in our risk management control procedures. Now, all of that, unfortunately, is kind of proprietary. And that's one of the reasons I've stripped out the exact companies that, this is associated with. Everything that you see there on these flow charts are basically what you can go through and look at in 14971 and draw your own conclusions. As far as the presentation is concerned, I believe the presentation is going to be available to all of the participants, and you can use those at your own discretion.
Absolutely. So a copy of this, so as far as the recording, as well as a copy of the slides will be sent out automatically to everybody who registered for today's webinar. Give us a little bit of time to send those out. Expect it within 24 hours, but making sure that you guys know those will get sent to you. Okay, so jumping in terms of the rest of the questions. We had one early on talking about how do you guys, how do manufacturers in general determine the lifespan of a medical device?
Well, the issue of life is really, really important right now. So let me go on a little bit of a side. Believe it or not, I'll get back to answering the question. I get criticized a lot because someone will ask me a question, I go down a road, and then eventually I come back to answer the question. However, so when we talk about product life cycle, that's really, really important because if you don't define product life, then whatever period that device is being used, if you've not defined life and that product malfunctions, as the firm and the manufacturer is held accountable to that. So everybody knows about reporting through MOD and reporting on MDRs, et cetera. And you know what happens, unfortunately, if someone gets killed as a result of the device. However, if that device, by definition, is being used outside of defined life, then you still have to investigate that, but you may not have to take overt action because the device has been used outside life. So, to answer the question, the question of what is defined life is a commercial and a technical discussion. From a commercial perspective, I know in some of the companies I was privileged to work in, we would define that we are going to come up with a new platform or a major platform upgrade every X years. We are also going to service our device for Y years. Therefore, the life of the device will be defined as X plus Y. Now, when we decide that we are going to use X years as time between platforms, then in our design, verification, validation, characterization testing, IQ, OQ, PQ, we want to prove very succinctly that our device will in fact perform during that entire time period. If, however, during your testing, during design verification, design validation, characterization testing, which I love to death. I love characterization testing. But if those testings come up and say, hey, marketing. You decided we wanted to go with a design life of 4 years and service for 2. However, my characterization testing indicates we can only go to 3 years to meet all of our safety margins. Then you may decide marketing wants 4. Technically, I can do 3. We're going to define design life as 3 years plus 2 years service. Let me get one little aside on characterization testing. The reason I love characterization testing, well, it's not a huge part of the formal design control when you look at the FDA requirements and the ISO requirements. The reason I love characterization testing so much was that when we got to the point of doing that, I like to be able to give that to the design engineers, the quality engineers, the testing engineers, and saying, here's the device. I do not expect to see this device back in a functioning manner. Now go take it, use it, abuse it, destroy it. Let's understand the failure modes and physics of failure, and have we completely understood that? As an example, in one area that I used to work in, we found out that during a hip replacement or a knee replacement, that in actual observation, we were seeing that some of the doctors were using our heavy-duty saw as a hammer because they had a little thing that they needed to do, and they just need to pound something a little bit in, and it was easier just to hit it with the housing of the drill or the saw instead of going and getting their hammer. We didn't fully anticipate that, but now that we understood it, the design people were able to do some things that put some more robustness in the design. Our devices are not and were not designed to be used as hammers, but we understood foreseeable misuse. They designed around it, and guess what? Even though they were using it as hammers, we weren't seeing failures in the operating field of people using the device as a hammer. So, next question.
Okay, so in terms of early on, we were talking about the differences between ISO 14971 2007, which the FDA recognizes, and EN ISO 14971 2012. And there was a question around what the FDA considers acceptable in terms of, ALARP or all of the other various as low as practical, things like that.
So first off, everybody knows the FDA does not recognize EN ISO 14971 2012 period as far as what is practical. That's a qualitative term. In that qualitative term, then my experience has been that when the FDA comes in and does a inspection on your design control process and they go through your risk management file, they're going to look at what is the technical work that you have done and what is your technical rationale. If that technical rationale makes sense as coming from your technical folks, I haven't seen them challenge that too much in the areas of is that as low as practical, okay? You see a lot of that also when you're going and you're doing a lot of your testing and you set your criteria for success. When you set your criteria for success, coming out of verification and most specifically validation, also during manufacturing transfer, and you look at what are my criteria for success. Am I looking at 95 at 95, 99 at 95, 99 at 99 for criticals? What statistical basis am I using? And if I can pass all those testing according to the criteria that I have set for success, and it makes sense logically and statistically, I've not seen a situation where an FDA investigator will look at me and say, I don't think that's as low as practical. I haven't had that experience. However, I've been blessed with design engineers and advanced quality engineers and people in statistics that run circles around me in technical issues that have always, in my instance, been able to make that case.
Awesome. Now, one of my favorite questions. I get this a lot working with individuals, and I love when it gets asked. What is the best time to start risk management activities during a project?
As soon as some sales guy is sitting in a bar with a napkin and says, I got an idea. Now,
Exactly.
beyond that, as one of the things that I really like is I can't believe how unbelievably blessed I've been able to work in companies like some of the companies that I was in, and the collaboration that takes place once sales and marketing comes up with an idea, sometimes harebrained, sometimes not. But once they come up with some of those great ideas, then once we start having a discussion, there is a formal process that we will go through where those things will be pitched, and you will have quality regulatory and the design people in to start having those discussions. Uh, One of the things I guess, and I will be very upfront with this in some of the discussions that I've had with some of my company presidents, is that I would kind of tell my president that you've got an entire group of people around you that are talking to you and pitching a bunch of things and telling you all these things that are going to go right, all these cascade of miracles that are going to occur, that we're going to go out and do this thing and take the market by storm, and all those great and wonderful things that are going to occur. And I don't disagree with that at all. However, what I would tell them is, me sitting at your right or left hand, hopefully, is that I'm also looking at what could go wrong. What are the risks that are out there, and what are we going to do to mitigate them? Everybody uses the example of Titanic. So if there had been a quality person with risk up on that crow's nest and would have been able to say, hey, iceberg ahead, 15 degrees to port right now, nobody would have ever heard of Titanic. And so the way I kind of liken that to some of the things that we do is we're always scanning that horizon of what could go wrong, what's going wrong out there, what's going wrong inside the manufacturing or the firm, and how do I advise the company to keep that from happening. And so getting quality, and we used to use the advanced quality engineers, it was one of the rare times where I would actually ask quality to have a quasi-operational role, which was I would want the advanced quality engineers to be responsible for the overall structure and filling out of the risk management file in conjunction with everybody in product development and regulatory and everybody else. But because I felt that document was so critical to the overall success of that product prior and post-launch, again, it's one of the few times that I wanted quality to actually have a quasi-operational role.
That's a great response. And there are lots of questions coming in that are starting to focus on the 2019 version, the draft of ISO 14971 2019. And so we've got a couple of questions about, one, have you seen it? Is it adding any new requirements? Is the process going to stay the same? I know there's been a lot of change within the med device industry recently with the introduction of the EU MDR and with now updates to ISO 14971. I'm sure this is causing a lot of angst.
It certainly is, and I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer because I have yet to see a full version of ISO 14971 2019. And unless or until I get to see that and do compare and contrast, I am really not the expert to look at that, and I really can't give you an informed answer.
One thing I can say is that others that we have interacted with on our blog, so take a look at the Greenlight.Guru blog. That's something where you can see some articles by a few individuals who have reviewed the 2019 version of ISO 14971. So you can take a look there and get some of their information and feedback. Okay, so I know that we are not going to be able to get to every single one of these questions today. Thank you guys so much for sending in all of these. These are fantastic. But one question looks like we do have someone on here, exactly actually the person I was thinking about, Edwin Bills. He actually says that there is a webinar that will be coming in November on ISO 14971 2019. If you haven't read content from Ed, definitely go take a look at what he's put out and written. He's been involved with these standards, so he is a great resource for getting some insight. Go check out information there and expect the webinar coming in November. Okay.
Sign me up now.
Yeah, no, I think we're all signing up now on this one. Okay, so guys, the last question that we've got is we actually have somebody here who has a lot of students online as part of their medical device course. I love the fact that we've got students listening to these as we start to get medical device professionals early in their career. What advice do you have for them around risk management?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm actually going to try to get through this without getting emotional. So to those students, I'm speaking directly to you. I want you to understand something. Again, I've been blessed 36 years in medical device, and the way it exists right now today, it is so much harder to get into the operating room than what it used to be. I've been through my credentialing, I've been through all my training, bloodborne pathogen, I've been through all my inoculations, hepatitis, everything that you got to do. But in the past, it was much easier to get into the OR. And to get into the OR, basically you showed up, hey, I'm from my company, oh yeah, come on in, sit over there, don't touch anything and shut up. And I got to observe so many surgeries and see so many things. In my career, I've been blessed where I've actually seen mothers cry. I've actually had a mother cry in my arms post-surgery when something we did either saved the life of that child or gave that child their life back. And I can't tell you, it's hard to get across what that means. By the same token, I've also observed, and I've been in an emergency room when I saw a child going through withdrawal because one of my devices failed. And I saw the anguish in that mother's eyes, knowing that my device caused that. So when we talk about risk management is what can I do the best that I possibly can to provide the highest level of assurance that when that device is used, that it will perform to what it needs to do. One of the discussions and one of the presentations I used to make to all new people coming into a company was called the moment of truth. And what the moment of truth says is that a physician and a healthcare provider team are going to be using my device in the most personal way possible on an individual. My job and the job of everybody in my company was to get this device into their hands so that they could affect favorably the outcome of that individual who is under the knife. And therefore, our responsibility was such that that surgeon or that healthcare provider should never have to think, is this thing going to work correctly? Am I going to be able to do my job to take care of this patient? That is our job. For that reason, that is why risk management is so very important to me. When I was in my last company, we did a back of the napkin calculation, and what we calculated very conservatively that our devices were going to be used in 50,000 surgeries that day and every day, 365 days a year. Now, I've got to have systems in place that enable me to have that level of assurance. And the risk management prior to launch, the risk management post-launch are the two ways that I was able to do that.